Now we're going to talk about schizophrenia, which is the most serious and debilitating of all the psychological disorders. It doesn't mean split personality. When we talked about that earlier, dissociative disorder is where you have multiple personalities. Schizophrenia is not multiple personalities, it's loss of contact with reality. That's the split. You're living in a different world than everybody else is. The symptoms, your textbook, OLI, talks about two symptoms, the positive and the negative symptoms. I'm going to talk about three. First, the positive symptoms, which I'm going to call psychotic symptoms, or hallucinations, or distorted perceptions, almost always hearing voices or hearing things that aren't really out there in the environment. And then delusions, which are false beliefs, sort of paranoia, think people are out to get me, delusions of persecution, or delusions of grandeur. I'm the very important, most important person in the world. False beliefs and false perceptions are the positive or psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia. There are also negative symptoms where some people just simply withdraw into themselves. They have apathy. They don't want to have any social interactions. So it's sort of reduced affect, the very, very low levels of emotion. And then there are the disorganized symptoms, where people have inappropriate emotions. They might start laughing at something when there's no reason for that. Bizarre behavior, and then derailment, where if you're having a conversation, their conversation doesn't coincide with your conversation. Derailment, or just going off on a different track. So psychotic or positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and disorganized symptoms. Now, the cause of schizophrenia, well, there's a big genetic influence. Here we see the concordance ratios, and you can see that concordance ratios for monozygotic twins is 0.46. That means if one twin has schizophrenia, the chances of another twin have schizophrenia is about 50%. But if you go to dizygotic twins, it reduces down to 0.14. So same genetics, slightly different genetics, a huge reduction in concordance ratio, whether they're living together or living apart, when the chance of concordance ratio for unrelated is only 1%. This shows you the differences in fraternal twins, identical twins, monozygotic, dizygotic in different countries, and you can see this huge difference between identical twins, the light bar, and fraternal twins, dizygotic twins, reduces down to less than 0.2. Also, people have looked at the brains of schizophrenics and find that the ventricles, these holes in the brain that contain this cerebral spinal fluid, are greater in schizophrenics than they are in non-schizophrenic people. So there's less brain mass, that's what it really means, because the ventricles are larger in schizophrenics. So there's been a loss of brain mass around the ventricles. There's also less frontal lobe activity in schizophrenics. Frontal lobes are where we have executive function, decision making, the important things about controlled attention. So there's simply less frontal activity in schizophrenic. There's also a little less activity also in the parietal lobes where the hippocampi are. And there's this continued loss of cells in the frontal lobe with the progression of the disease. So it actually continues on. The longer someone has had schizophrenic symptoms, the longer they have, the less frontal activity they have. Another biological hypothesis is the dopamine hypothesis. Dopamine is one of the transmitter substances. And the idea is that in schizophrenia, you have overactivity of dopamine. At autopsy, for example, we found that schizophrenic brains had 6-fold dopamine receptors than a normal brain. And if you have drugs that block the action of dopamine, like thorazine or Millerol, they reduce the symptoms in some patients. So again, if we're able to reduce the dopamine activity, we get reduction of the symptoms of schizophrenia in many patients. There's also the diathesis stress model, which says that you have two things. You have the basic genetic predisposition for schizophrenia, those genes that we see in the monozygotic twin comparisons with the dizygotic twins. And then you have some immediate proximate cause that is some aspect of the environment or some experience that you have, probably early in life. So we have this predisposition for schizophrenia, but it takes this stressor to take place in order to really show it manifest. So a diathesis means vulnerability or constitutional susceptibility, and that's produced by our genes, but it takes this trauma or some kind of stress to really make it produce. And this is a model which shows that. We have the environment or the experiences that are positive or negative, and then we have the difference between the resilient individuals that don't have the gene or the vulnerable individuals that do have the gene that produce schizophrenia, genes probably. And if everything is positive, there are no differences. But once things become negative, the stress produces an outcome which is negative, which is schizophrenia. Now, there are different types of schizophrenia, and let me just mention what they are. There's a disorganized, where the person has profound psychological disorganization. They really are living in a different world than we are. There's catatonic schizophrenia, which is rare, but is characterized by stupor and immobility. They might be in some particular body style and they stay that way throughout the day. There's paranoid schizophrenia, which is really strongly influenced by these delusions, the psychotic symptom of delusions, either of persecution or of grandeur. And then we have two sort of catch-all categories, the undifferentiated, which the person is clearly schizophrenic, they clearly are not in contact with reality, but they don't show these very clear symptoms that you see in the top three. And then there's something called residual schizophrenia, which is people that had schizophrenic episode, but they are showing only mild symptoms and are able to function in the world. So that's called residual schizophrenia. Thank you.